Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you here to Valley Park Middle School. We're just south of the famous Ontario Science Centre, which was so precipitously closed just about 1 week ago. Before we get into things, I just want to go through a few formalities, well, not formalities, just recognize some very important people. I'd like to acknowledge that we have the offices of MP Rob Oliphant and MP Michael Coteau here. Thank you very much for being here. I would also like to acknowledge our local councillor, Councillor John Burnside. I don't know where you are, but would you stand up for me, sir? He's a really easy person to find because he's usually the tallest person in the room. And we're also joined by Councillor Josh Matlow, who's joined us over here in the front. Councillor Matlow, actually, we all understand that you just introduced a motion at City Hall, and so perhaps before I dive into my stuff, perhaps you might want to say a thing or two about that?
Thank you. Is the mic coming through to the back? Yes. I'll use my outdoor voice if it doesn't. First of all, hi, I'm Josh Matlow, and I'm a Toronto City Councillor, and I'm happy to serve with Councillor Burnside and our colleagues at Council, where we are not giving up the fight to save the Ontario City. And we brought a motion to City Council last week, as many of you know, to ask our city staff to report to the Executive Committee of Council as to what the province's obligations are to us, the City of Toronto, and the people of Toronto, with respect to continuing running a science centre at the location where it's at, in front of Council. And while I don't know what the staff are going to come back to us with, I look forward to updating, obviously, Adil and all of you on what our next steps will be, but I'm not going to give up. And I just wanted to say one bit of acknowledgement here. Doug Ford didn't ask anybody in this community what they thought about closing and moving the Science Centre. Not for a single day. And when he closed it, there is no actual basis to permanently close the Science Centre. It can be fixed, it should be fixed, and we want to make sure it is fixed in there for the next 200 years or more. And as a parent myself, and as a kid who was brought there myself by my parents, I want to acknowledge that Adil Shamji, your MPP, is doing something that was never done, which is actually engaging the community that he represents so that your voice is heard. I want to acknowledge your leadership on this.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, I wanted to come by simply to give you that update, to acknowledge your leadership and the fact that you're doing the work that should have been done by the government, but you're doing it. And I want to thank all of you for making your voices heard. We are going to work together to make sure that the Science Centre is here, right where it belongs, in front of the Toronto City.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate it. All right, friends, neighbors, community members, we are here to unite, to say in one single voice that the Ontario Science Centre is here to stay. It's here to stay on Don Mills Road, and we do not buy the unacceptable report and spin coming from Queen's Park that it's supposed to move somewhere else. Okay? And what we are going to do today, I have really 3 goals. Number 1, I would like to share with you how we got to where we are today. And in sharing the history of how we've arrived to this exact moment, we're going to peel back the layers on this onion, which frankly stinks, to show that the case to move the Science Centre is meaningless. It is baseless, and it needs to stay here on Don Mills Road. That's point number 1. Point number 2, when the Science Centre was suddenly and unacceptably closed about 1 week ago, it threw families, businesses, and our community into a tailspin. My constituency office has been full of people asking for help because they don't know where they're going to send their kids for camp, because business owners are worried about the loss of foot traffic because of the cut in tourism coming into Don Valley East. And so we're going to talk about supports. The third thing that we're going to do is I brought in some community partners so that we're all connected and united. And then finally, we're going to entertain your questions and talk about what every single person in this room can do to send a message to the Premier about where we want the Science Centre to stay. Does that sound good? Perfect. So there it is. The jewel, not just of Don Valley East, but of Ontario. A beautiful architectural masterpiece, opened in 1969. Ever since, for decades, a source of cultural, educational, and economic prosperity, not just to Flemington Park and Thorncliffe Park, not just to Don Valley East, not just to Ontario or even Canada, but to the world. And this is what happened last week. Next slide. Just like that. I'm going to tell you what I was doing on that day because it's absolutely shocking. But in the wake of that, as I mentioned, people have been thrown into a tailspin, and we need to come out of that onwards. So let's talk about how we got there. I'm going to take us back, way back to the 60s, okay, when Premier John Robarts first began working on the Science Centre. And at the time, it was going to be class-leading, an educational and scientific masterpiece intended to be one of our province's centennial projects. One of those projects to celebrate 100 years of our country's confederation. Next slide. Now, even from the beginning, to be entirely honest, there had been some debate about where the Science Centre should be. At the time, the City of Toronto was thinking maybe it should actually be at Exhibition Place. Isn't that interesting? But the province of Ontario, after conducting an analysis, said it belongs on Don Mills Road. Why? Because it was in the center of this city. Because it was at the center of multiple major modes of transportation. And that has only become even more true as we're at the intersection of two major public transit lines, the Ontario Line and the Eglinton Crosstown. It was felt that the Science Centre was not just the building. It was not just the institution. It was the environment around it. This beautiful ravine ecosystem that we have here in Don Valley East was to be an integral part of that Science Centre. And that is why the province of Ontario and the Conservative Premier John Robarts decided it should be where it is. Next slide. In fact, this is what he said at the opening. I am confident that during the next 100 years, it will have an impact on far more people than any other single centennial project. And even that was an unambitious prediction because, next slide, Raymond Moriyama, the Order of Canada, internationally renowned architect who designed it, actually projected that it should last 250 years and beyond. Oh. So here we are, roughly 55 years later. Here we are, roughly 55 years later. And people were talking about, there were some articles that had come out, should Ontario Science Centre be moved, should it not? It didn't really become an issue until the most recent mayoral election, when one of the candidates said, we think that this should move to Ontario Place. And as part of that, the carrot to move it was that 5,000 homes could be built on the location of the Science Centre. Well, here's the reality. We are in a housing crisis, make no mistake about it. We do need to build more homes. And there are homes that are projected, that are anticipated to be built on some of the north parking lot, which is almost always not occupied by cars. That's okay. But as Brian Rudy, the architect of the firm who designed and built the Science Centre, told me, the actual plateau on which the Science Centre sits is not suitable for housing. Next slide. So a short while after that first mayoral announcement, the Premier of Ontario announced that he was going to relocate the Ontario Science Centre to Ontario Place, just out of the blue. The Minister of Infrastructure, who goes by the name of King Asurma, promised that a business case that would justify that decision would come later. Apparently, the business case had already been done. All of us kicked into high gear trying to find out what is that business case. Move on. We don't need to see that. We've got a lot to talk about, so we don't need to watch news things, and we can skip that one too. Just suffice to say, from the very beginning, our office was heavily engaged and deeply concerned about any proposal to move the Science Centre. And this was one of my comments. I mean, yes, the Science Centre is an older building. It's about 55 years old now. So is Casa Loma. It's pretty old. The ROM is pretty old. The CN Tower is about the same age. I guess we should go about demolishing all of those. Queen's Park is about to undergo a $1 billion renovation. Maybe we should tear that one down as well. Onwards. There you go. Someone in the front row saying there are a lot of houses in Don Valley East that maybe should come down if we apply that logic. So in April, the Minister of Housing says that if necessary, we'll change the name of the Science Centre station on the Eglinton Crosstown. The day afterwards, I launched my petition throughout Don Valley East, and it ended up being around the world to try and rally support to save the Science Centre. As I'll show later, we submitted over 30,000 signatures. And now the torch has been passed on to the Save the Science Centre Coalition. I think they're at 72,000 signatures now. And these are signatures from all around the world. And then the Premier on April 27th said that Science Centre workers will retain their jobs. Now, I'm going to pause here because Martin Fisher, who is the president of the local OPSU union, is here. Is that proving to be true?
So last week, our cafeteria staff, mostly women, mostly racialized people, got laid off already. So they are a third-party contractor, but they're part of our union, and there was a clear promise not to any job loss, no immediate job losses. So that's what it was.
Thank you. Was there anything else you wanted to say?
Oh, okay. Just quickly, thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. I represent about 300 staff at the Science Centre. I know many of you have been there and seen us in the white lab clothes, and many of us are behind the scenes making sure that everything works. And the reason why we are there is because of the amazing spirit of the Science Centre. You go there to have fun. You go there to be yourself. And that's why the kids love it so much, right? And we want to continue with that, and we want to do it in this community. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was one of the first of many more broken promises that we'll soon be talking about. So June 8th was the day that I submitted my first round of petitions. It was 900 pages. Over 30,000 signatures with one very clear message: save the Science Centre. This is what it looked like when we delivered the petitions. I got in trouble for it.
I may be more than one legislative page for this one. I'm pleased to present a number of petitions. I'm pleased to present a number of petitions on behalf of over 30,000 people to save the Science Centre.
Okay.
And I shall read the first one. To the Legislative Assembly of Ontario.
And I'm not trying to hide the text of the petition. There are copies of the petition. I invite you to sign it. I got in trouble with the speaker because when I lifted up the 900 pages and then slammed them on the desk, he said I was using the petition as a prop, which you're not allowed to do. So anyways, but I think he got the message. In any case, another interesting thing happened very shortly afterwards. On June 30th, the Minister of Infrastructure revealed the request for a proposal for what a new relocated Science Centre should look like. And this is what it said. It was another broken promise. There would be no planetarium. There would be no immersive rainforest. There would be no outdoor adventure playground. It essentially revealed that a Science Centre relocated to Ontario Place would be nothing but a shadow of its former self. That's why we're fighting for this. Next, please. Now, I mentioned earlier that when the first announcement was made that the Science Center would get relocated, reference was made to a business case. And for months afterwards, we were fighting to get that business case. We asked for it, we spoke to it in the legislature, and because we weren't getting it, there were multiple members of the media, for example, that submitted freedom of information requests. And the government opposed and opposed and opposed. And then right before they were left with no choice but to respond to the freedom of information requests, they released it anyways. So they just dithered and delayed. They had promised that the Science Center would be more modern, more advanced, more cost effective. Of course, we'd already seen the request for proposal, which indicated that it wouldn't be. And when we actually got our hands on that business case, it was revealed to be entirely flawed, leaving out major things and missing the point on multiple important risks. So a couple of things that I want to draw out from that. This was a statement that I put out shortly after. Essentially, their proposed new Science Center would be half the size of the original one. Half the size. That is the only way, actually, between cutting the size in half and then having fewer staff and not taking into consideration a number of costs. That was the only way in which they were able to argue that a relocated Science Center at Ontario Place would be cheaper than repairing it where it is right now. So, not surprisingly, many of us, frankly from all parties, saw that business case for what it was. It was cover. It was spin. But of course, when we pointed that out to the Premier, the argument was made we were just saying no to everything. Well, the Auditor General, very shortly afterwards, the Office of the Auditor General came out with its own interpretation and performed its own business case. Now, for those that don't know, the Auditor General is an independent office of the legislature. Doesn't belong to a party, isn't a part of the opposition or anything like that. They exist to hold all members of provincial parliament to account. They did their own analysis of the business case, and they pointed out a couple of things. And I'm going to quote, go back. And I quote, "We noted that the recent relocation decision was not fully informed and based on preliminary and incomplete costing information and had proceeded without full consultations from key stakeholders or a clear plan for the existing site." Now, it was, I think, like 80 or 90 pages. I'm not going to summarize all of them, but there are two things I really want to pull out for you. There was one sentence where it said, the lease signed with Therma is the private foreign spa company that is building a spa at Ontario Place. The lease signed with Therma obligates the province to provide a number of dedicated parking spaces for Therma between 2028 and 2030. In other words, the government has to build a parking garage for this private spa company. And then a few sentences later, it says the submission proposed that the new parking be integrated with a new Ontario Science Centre building in order to dispel public stakeholder concerns. In other words, the government building a parking garage at Ontario Place on the taxpayer dime that we now know is going to be somewhere between $600 and $650 million doesn't look good for the government. As a result, they're going to put a science center on top of it and say the parking's for the science center. That's the Auditor General talking. That's not me. That's a direct quote. We'll come to questions right at the end, okay? Forgive me. Okay, onwards. The Auditor General also pointed out a few more things. Number one, that the overall Science Center size was reduced by just over 50%. It had 18% less space for exhibits, preliminary and incomplete cost information, and it didn't consult key stakeholders. We had a Science Center Summit shortly thereafterwards. We brought together major stakeholders. We did the stakeholder consultation the government didn't do. We brought together the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, union members. We brought together the architecture firm that built the Science Center, and we all came together. And we came up with strategies to push back on this. I sent a letter to the Premier, and perhaps that was my mistake, because once he realized we were mobilizing, he knew that he had to speed up. Go ahead. Which brings us to June 21st. On June 21st, I was at the Ontario Science Centre at 9 o'clock in the morning. I was speaking at an international healthcare conference. International healthcare conference. As I was driving in, I saw the posts getting installed on the driveway. Now, I was rehearsing my speech, so it struck me as odd, but I didn't know exactly what was going on, and I didn't have any time to think about it. I gave my speech, the international conference continued, and a short while later, I was back in my constituency office, and someone called me and said, they're putting up fences around the Science Center. That's how the MPP of the riding found out. That's how the community found out. That's unacceptable. In one fell swoop, so this was June 21st, and July 8th is when most Science Center camps are about to begin. No support. The government said that they would support families who had kids who were signed up for camps. I've talked to many of those families. They've heard nothing. Camp's starting in a couple days. Businesses, I was walking through the plaza at Flemington Park. They're seeing lower foot traffic. Right? Our community is suffering. Onwards. Onwards. So there's one last thing that I want to address, and then we're going to move on to community supports and how we can all come together. I want to address the reason for the abrupt and sudden Science Center closure. We had no idea it was coming. It's this engineering report. This engineering report put together by a consulting company, and the government came out and said afterwards that it said that the roof was about to fail and collapse. They were hoping that none of us would read the engineering report, because I did. It doesn't say that. So first of all, the concern is supposedly about certain concrete panels that are called RAAC, okay? Reinforced autoclave aerated concrete. And the worry is that those might fail. First of all, only 57% of the roof has that kind of panel. The rest is a kind of roofing that we don't even have to worry about. Of that 57%, so just over half of the roof even has that kind of panel. 6 panels were identified that were in a critical state. Those were immediately replaced while the consultation was happening. Consequently, there are no critical panels right now. None. Now, some of them do need repairs. Less than 2.5% are marked for priority replacement and can easily be done by October 31st. Yet for some reason, the Science Center, with no notice, was shuttered. Onwards. Now, I've been saying this from the very beginning, but I am your elected official. I'm the member of provincial parliament, and I sit on the opposition side. So there are many people who immediately considered my interpretation to be suspect, because I'm supposed to oppose, I'm supposed to point out, I'm supposed to be critical of the government, right? And of course, I have very fond memories of my time at the Science Center. So supposedly there are personal motivations for me to keep for me to try and save the Science Center. So what I did last week, I brought Brian Rudy. He's the principal architect and partner of the firm that built the Science Center. And I asked him to explain the report. And this is one video I am going to ask for us to show, because he's the expert. He's going to explain it to us. Okay. Yeah. Let's try that again. Okay. Where is the speaker? Okay, I know, I'm sorry. And we have it subtitled, but because the lights are back on.
Yeah, this is loud as it gets.
Okay. Can we try and turn the light off then?
Excuse me,
Yes?
probably put the mic against.
Sure. Okay, sure. I'll just read the subtitles. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. So just start back. So he says, the exhibition spaces, the vast majority of them are completely safe. There's not even the type of panel that's been pointed at. So-called reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete panels, which are essentially concrete panels, none of those exist over most of the exhibition space. I think I counted about 11 panels that were above there, that were in need of repair, 11. out of thousands in this building. It's a drop in the bucket. It's probably less than 1% of that roof. And again, those panels can be very easily repaired, cordoned off where they are an issue, and the public can be completely protected and safe in that repair. In fact, this is a normal thing for all buildings that go through regular repairs. A building of this age, of course, is going to see repairs like this, et cetera, et cetera.
And Jamal McClure was at Science Center too as well.
Right. Onwards. Okay, so now, just very quickly, so we now know that more than 50 Science Center workers are about to lose their jobs. Onwards. And the last thing I want to say as I bring us up to the exact moment that we are in the Science Center's history, there is now a request for proposals for an alternative location for the Science Center. Okay? It's, yes, so here are the details. So that Science Center cannot be made available until 2026. That Science Center, at least the request for proposal says that they only need about 10 to 20% of the space the original Science Center had. And the estimates are now out that it'll cost about $70 million to have that temporary Science Center, whereas repairing the Science Center would cost $22 million. Wow. Call it $40 million, right? Call it $40 million. It's still cheaper than going to a relocated Science Center. It was put up on the Premier's orders. Okay, so we'll come to questions in just a moment. So this is where we are right now. And as I mentioned, our community has been thrown into a tailspin. So I want to talk about what we can do all to come together, support each other, and for those who run businesses or have children that are in need of some sort of supports, need somewhere to go over the summer, need camps, I want to talk a little bit about what the options are right now. So I want to focus on 4 things: students and children, families, tourism, and businesses. Okay? So the first thing is, I hope that everyone was able to pick up on your way in. We've prepared a document, okay, with every single summer activity and camp that we can find. All of those are either free or heavily subsidized. If you are a parent, you do not have somewhere to send your child, we have a list of camps that you could pick up the phone and get your son or daughter signed up tomorrow. Okay? We've listed all of the libraries, all of the courses that they'll be running, all of the classes that they will be running. We've got, I mentioned summer camps. We've got all the splash pads, all of the organizations that can provide support, and some of them are here in the room. We've got Toronto Public Library here. We've got the neighborhood organization here. Save the Science Center is here. So we've got a whole bunch of people. Please use that document. Share it with anyone that you know that is suffering. And if you still need help after that, my office is at your service to help connect you with the supports, activities, and camps or whatever that you need for your children. The next thing is, as I mentioned, I've already heard from business owners that because fewer people are coming into our community, fewer people are going to our restaurants, they're going to our businesses, they're going to our shops. So we're starting a Shop Local campaign. I hope that you'll consider either on your way in or on your way out, grabbing one of our Shop Local signs, put it up in your window, put the word out that now is the time that we need to come together, okay? And whether it is the plaza across the street here in Flemington Park or our neighboring riding Thorncliffe Park, whether it is shops at Don Mills or the plaza on Winford Drive or somewhere else, let's get out and support our restaurants and businesses. Now, I mentioned that I had very early on started a petition to save the Science Center. We've got written copies here. You can also go online to saveoursciencecenter.ca. That's what the petition looks like. Sign it. I'm going to keep submitting petitions. But we have some phenomenal partners in the back, the Save the Science Center Coalition. They've got even more signatures than I do, so I hope you'll consider partnering with them. But the most important thing, I want to ask everybody to do this. I want you to call the Premier's office. I humbly ask you, call the Premier's office. It's 416-325-1941. This government has changed its mind before. In fact, it does it all the time. They changed their mind on Bill 124. They changed their mind on the Greenbelt. They changed their mind on urban boundary expansion. They changed their mind on Bill 28, on which they tried to trample on collective bargaining rights of education workers, on and on and on. Now we need to get them to change their mind on the Science Centre. Call the Premier. And when you do, you can tell him Dr. Shamji sent you, and that we want him not to move, demolish, or repurpose the Science Centre because it is safe, cheap, and perfect exactly where it is. And the final thing that I will say is, as I continue to amplify my efforts, as we continue to amplify our efforts to save the Science Centre, I will continue to put out updates. So I hope you will consider joining my mailing list. Every week I tell you what's happening in the community, and every chance I get, I tell you what we're doing to save the Science Centre. Finally, supports from our community. We have a few speakers that I just want to invite up to the stage. So we had Councillor Matlow. Toronto Public Library, why don't you come up and let us know what the opportunities are for our community.